is what I'm going to say, because it's 5 years since the first ever edition of Cross Question. This is episode 380, can you believe? And they're all available to watch. I think they're all available to watch on Global Player or our LBC YouTube channel. Tonight, we have Jeremy Corbyn with us, Independent MP for Islington North and former leader of the Labour Party. Danny Kruger is Conservative MP for Devizes. He's founder of the New Conservatives, a group of predominantly red wall Tory MPs. He's not one of them, by the way, hoping to shape the party's policies ahead of the next election. He's got a new book out called Covenant. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Professor Mona Siddiqui is Professor of Islamic and Interreligious Studies at the University of Edinburgh and a social commentator and author. And Sarah Southern, former advisor to David Cameron and a political commentator and comedian. They're here to answer your questions. Lots already coming in. 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 and you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
I was looking at who was on the first panel on Cross Question 5 years ago. Somebody called Liz Truss. Whatever happened to her? Andrew Adonis was on, Gisela Stewart, the former Labour MP, and Liam Halligan, the economist from The Telegraph, he was on too. So, very different panel tonight, but equally distinguished, if not more distinguished, can I say? Because Mona, you haven't been on this programme
No,
before,
this is my first time.
I'm very intimidated by you as a sort of social commentator.
That's a perfect start to the show.
So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, and of course the rest of the panel. Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Hassan in Westminster. Hi Hassan, what would you like to ask?
Hi Ian, happy birthday. Does the panel believe that the new Labour front bench can actually offer change, or has Starmer moved the party so far to the right that it will just be austerity for another 5 years?
Well, I've got to come to Jeremy first on that one, haven't I?
Yes.
Go on.
I'm interested in Hassan's question because I think there's a lot in it. Keir Starmer has appointed new people. They are more and more in line with him and with the sort of new Labour philosophy than his previous appointments were, and there's less and less of an alternative being offered. And I think that's particularly a bad thing, particularly on issues like work and pensions, DWP area, which I wish the party was committed to ending, for example, the two-child policy, which is so desperately impoverishing of large families.
But isn't he doing what you did? I mean, you had a lot of your own allies in your own shadow cabinet who bought into your form of Labour policy. You had others, I mean, like Keir Starmer, I suppose, who was seen as more on the right of the party. He's got, and you're going to ask me who they are in a minute, he's got one or two sort of on the broader left. I mean, Angela Rayner was, I think, a big winner in this reshuffle, wasn't she? You wouldn't describe her as being on the right of the party.
I tried to balance it. I had no choice because of the makeup of the Parliamentary Labour Party, could only appoint him from within it. Did I have close political allies? Yes, obviously. Did I have others who didn't usually agree with me? Often, yes, but surely that's how it's got to be. You've got to actually be inclusive of the whole party.
And you feel he's not
work.
being inclusive?
I don't think he's being inclusive enough, no. I look at very competent people like Andy McDonnell, Rebecca Long-Bailey. Where are they?
You could also argue people like Stella Creasy, who I think would be seen as on the right of the party. She's not on the front bench at all, something I've never really worked out, given that she's a very talented media performer.
I would imagine that's something to do with her support for proportional representation.
Oh, wow.
I would have thought. I don't know. I can't read into Keir Starmer's mind, and I wouldn't wish you to ask me any questions about my readings into his mind. It won't get us very far.
I'm now tempted to do so, but Mona Siddiqui, how do you think that this reshuffle is another step on the way to a Labour victory, or do you think that it's not sufficiently radical and Keir Starmer is showing all the signs of being far too conservative with the small c?
So I don't belong to any political party, so this isn't a party political broadcast. But I do think that at some point you have to decide, how do we get into power first? And how inclusive can you be if you want to get into power? And I think leadership the way you show leadership in any political party is not going to be totally inclusive. You will have to have people who buy into your vision. And in that context, there will be people who will be left behind. I also wonder what people mean when they say you have to be radical, because I think most people in the UK, and this is a massive generalisation I'm making, are in the centre of politics, whether they belong to a political party or not. And what they want is effective government. They're tired of the left and the right debates. They're tired of binary politics. They want politics that mean something. They want politicians who will actually deliver. And they want politics to be, because ultimately politics is about people.
Don't they also want a choice, though?
But they do have a choice. They
have a choice between two political parties, but when Jeremy was leader of the Labour Party, there was a genuine choice between his form of socialism and Boris Johnson's form of conservatism. Nobody could say that there wasn't a choice there, whereas a lot of my listeners often say to me, well, what's the point in voting? Because you've got two political leaders who actually aren't that much different.
But then you can also argue, well, how is Keir Starmer in the lead by whatever it is, 20%? Is that because people like the choices he's made, and does that say something about the political shifts in our own society?
Well, I think it's not almost wholly down to the fact that we have such an incompetent government that it's not necessarily an endorsement of Keir Starmer.
That's true, but I don't think that we should think of we should kind of preempt that this is a Labour Party victory, that they are certainly, on the road to 10 Downing Street. A lot can happen in a year. And I completely agree with so much of what's happened in the last few months, where politics has become a shambles. Politics is completely reactive. It's constantly firefighting by the present government. But I still think that people do want a choice, I agree. But people also want to know that whoever gets in is going to deliver. I think we put a lot of emphasis on choice. People want choice. We want choice in schools. We want choice in hospitals. I think most of the time we want good, not necessarily choice. We want good government. We want good schools. We want good hospitals. And I think in some ways choice has become almost a kind of buzzword which hides a lot of other sins.
Which I suspect that word features in your book, Danny Kruger, but we'll come on to that in a bit. Now, just to answer Hassan's question, I mean, when you look at that reshuffle that Keir Starmer conducted yesterday, it was done very competently. It's all over within a couple of hours. Conservative reshuffles in recent years have been slightly more dramatic than that, I think you'll probably agree. But what did that tell you about where Labour is and where they're going?
Well, I've some respect for Keir's decision to move his shadow cabinet so decisively back towards the Blairite centre that Jeremy describes. I regret some of the good people who've gone, not particularly because they're on the left, just because they're interesting. So I think Lisa Nandy was my favourite member of the shadow cabinet. She's obviously demoted to a non-existent brief. So that reflects Keir's attitude to her, and I regret it because I think she's good and clever. She stands in that sort of blue Labour tradition, that sort of conservative Labour tradition I like. But overall, what it means is that the Labour Party have abandoned the moment of principle that they had when Jeremy led them and have decided simply to pursue power on the old Blairite playbook. And, hats off to Keir. The question is, what does he actually stand for? What will he do if he ever wins power? What choice will the public genuinely have at the next election? And I think the question really remains, what on earth are his core principles? What is he trying to do other than to win power? And what are the answers he's got to the challenges of today? I share your general point, Ian, and Mona too. I mean, I'm afraid my party hasn't covered itself in glory in the last year or two. I think we've made a series of political mistakes, but policy-wise, and in terms of the priorities that the Prime Minister has set out, I think we're on the right track. But I would also like us to be distinguishing ourselves more clearly and coherently from the Labour. None of us should be fighting on the soggy centre ground. We should be setting out our stall coherently as Conservatives, in our case, as Labour in theirs.
Sarah Southern.
I think it's really interesting what Keir's done in terms of kind of creating a slightly more Blairite cabinet, because it just shows he's completely on election footing. He knows that the general election is probably about 13 months away. I think it's going to be on Halloween 2024, which I'm sure we're all looking forward to. And the fact that he's...
full moon.
See, that is an interesting one, because, of course, we'd have an election that day, and then what would it be, 5 days later, there's the US presidential election.
It's going to be the most exciting time for reporters like you.
Is probably going to have an election around that time too.
Absolutely. So I think by putting in place the people he wants to see move from his shadow cabinet to his cabinet, it means means that they can all do a barnstorming speech at their party conference in about 4 weeks' time. They can begin to lay out what it is that they want to present to the country. What is it the country is choosing? I know that we don't like that word this evening, but we need to see what it is, because I still feel as though a lot of people don't really know what Keir is really standing for, what people are going to be voting for when they do go to the ballot boxes.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Jeremy, when you were leader, I think a year before the 2017 election, a year before the 2019 election, I could have easily sat here and recited the kind of policies that you were going to put in your manifesto, and I think most of the electorate understood that. If you asked me now to spend 5 minutes talking about Labour Party policy at the next election, I couldn't do it, because we don't know. Do you think that's a mistake, that they need to be much more upfront about what they want to do rather than be so frightened of committing to anything?
I think you have to commit to the general direction you want to go, and you have to recognise the sense of stress there is all over the country about insecurity of income, about poverty, about housing issues. And whenever anything remotely radical is suggested within the Labour Party, or even by the Labour Party conference, it's immediately said by Keir, no, we're not going to do that. Not going to bring water into public ownership, not going to bring energy into public ownership. So what is the offer? Is it going to be regulation of the private sector, which has so lamentably failed in the water industry? I mean, there has to be something a bit clearer. I mentioned the two-child policy earlier, but there are an awful lot of other issues, particularly housing, that is so desperately frightening, particularly for young and middle-aged people who've got no permanent secure accommodation.
Do you think that maybe what's missing here from our politics is any sense of optimism and sunlit uplands ahead of us? That, I mean, I remember when you were leader, I remember doing a programme saying, I think one of the big mistakes that Jeremy Corbyn is making is being Mr. Misery Guts all the time. And I think that was more towards the end, towards the 2019 election, maybe more than the 2017. Yeah. But you were rightly doing what an opposition leader has to do and criticise a lot. But there wasn't a lot of the sort of, well, over there, that's where we're heading and it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's very difficult as a party leader to deal with the complexity of opposing what the government is doing and setting out your vision of the future and setting out the general political vision of the kind of society you want to create. The media doesn't give you a lot of space to set out the vision. All interviews tend to very quickly go into the detail of whatever the problem is of the day. Now, maybe that's the fault of party leaders as well. Maybe it's the fault of our political system. There isn't enough discussion about what your overall objective is. I want to live in a society that is more equal. I want to live in a society where nobody is homeless. I want to live in a society where children don't underachieve in school because of the awful housing they're living in. That's the sort of vision I would like to see, but also being prepared to be quite bold on environmental and social justice policies. You can't run away from the issue of environmental change just because somebody complains that it's a war on the motorist. You've actually got to stand your ground and go out there and campaign on it.
And Danny, this whole thing about being optimistic, that's quite difficult when you've been in power for 13, 14 years and people say, well, you can be optimistic, you can promise us the earth, but why haven't you delivered it in the last 13 years?
That's totally right. And I think you've also got to recognise the reality of the lives that people are living. And the fact is, and I don't blame the government for this exclusively, because it started well before we came to power. In fact, it's a syndrome of our century that real wages have stagnated, living standards haven't risen. We're suffering the long effects of technological transformation in the economy, as well as a whole load of cultural changes, which I think have had a bad effect on society. So it is difficult to sound positive when actually a whole lot of people are suffering very, very seriously, economically and sort of...
Danny, how do you feel about things like universal basic income?
Well, I think that, that's a policy...
As an example.
Well, I mean, I don't personally think it is the right answer, although I think we do have to transform welfare radically, and we do need to put a proper floor under people's incomes. So I recognise the argument there, and you're making a suggestion in response to the changes in our economy, which are real, and we do need to adapt to them. But, I mean, Ian, I think the challenge for us is the party which has been in power all this time, and the great achievement that Boris pulled off, and that we need to pull off again in this election, is actually paradoxically to run against our own record, to recognise that a lot is still really, much was done. And just quickly, the three things that we did in power since 2010 are to fix the improve school standards, to reform welfare, and to fix the fiscal crisis that Labour left us. But there's a whole lot of stuff we haven't done. There's a whole lot of stuff, frankly, that has got worse while we've been in power, and we need to recognise that and to recognise the lives that people are living now. So I'm all for presenting a positive vision. I have a very positive vision. It's quite an old-fashioned one in many senses, but it's also one that responds to the technological realities of today and the new economy that is emerging. I think you need to be real before you can start putting a positive vision.
Can I just say very quickly, though, I think that despite all of this, what people do need is a sense of not just vision in what you can deliver if you come into power, but also what you can actually imagine a society to be. And I think part of the problem is, and I think Jeremy alluded to it, is so quickly public commentators or journalists want to know how you're going to fund everything. And not everything can be funded straight away. Not everyone has an answer to this. But I think what we've found in the last few years, and I would disagree on some of what you've just said just now, but is that people feel that there is very little hope. Not because we don't know the answers to everything, but because politics has become so reactive. It's just constantly mopping up messes. And that's not what we need as a society now.
Well, we might come on to that in the next question. Do stay listening. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 19 minutes past 8. I nearly had a Gillian Keegan moment there, saying things in front of a microphone, but it's to do with the question that we might have at the end of the programme, so I won't give it away at the moment. Ruby in Plymouth says, yet another local council has gone bust, and our schools and hospitals are in danger of literally falling apart. Is this the legacy of austerity? We have with us Jeremy Corbyn, Danny Kruger, Professor Mona Siddiqui and Sarah Southern. Sarah, let's come to you first on that. This is Birmingham City Council. They've declared themselves bankrupt today, which you think Birmingham is the second city of the country. How can that possibly be?
It's really concerning. I appreciate that other councils have ended up in this position, but we've not had one that is of this size and you would hope would be able to weather it. I mean, they just had the Commonwealth Games 12 months ago, you know. I was hearing earlier on the radio that one of the reasons that they think it might be is because they have to fulfil £1 billion gap in their gender pay gap, as obviously they had auditors in and realised that they weren't paying everybody equally. I don't think that should be a reason why a council goes under. You know, everyone should be paid what they should be paid. But I fear that this could be the beginning of something that we see across the country, and especially what we've seen with the the melting
'Cause
concrete.
we have seen it in Thurrock and I think, was it Northamptonshire or South Northamptonshire?
But one of the concerns, obviously, is that there will be things that they're committed to pay for. You know, they will have contracts with people. Are we at a point where they can't fulfil those, or are they in a complete limbo until they're voted out? When are the next elections there? It puts it in a very difficult position. And I can only assume that the government's going to have to step in. We can't have a council like Birmingham not fulfil
You say
all of
the
its
government,
criteria.
effectively you mean the taxpayer?
True, the taxpayer is going to have to step in again.
And what about the second part of the question here about the fact that we've got this problem with this form of concrete, which means that some schools are having to close, or at least having some classrooms. Hospitals inevitably are going to be affected as well, and I suspect a lot of other places. Now, the questioner, Ruth, thinks that's down to austerity, is it?
I don't necessarily think it's 100% down to austerity, but it's certainly down to the pressures that we've had. I think if we look at what we've had to spend money on in the last 3 years, we're all aware of what it has had to have been, or what the priorities of the country have been in 2020 and 2021. But if councils aren't able to do things like build new schools, and kids are still learning in buildings that were thrown up in the 1950s and 1960s in the post-war era, those have got to be replaced. They've got to be new schools.
But Michael Gove, when he was Education Secretary, he cancelled Ed Balls Building Schools for the Future programme, but presumably because the financial situation that the country was in at the time. So that surely has to be put down to austerity.
Yeah, but I don't believe it's 100% of austerity. I think, that if we were listening to the former civil servant in education, he was saying that it had been the Chancellor at the time who'd reduced the amount of schools that were built, and I believe the Chancellor at the time was Rishi Sunak. So I think that this is a long-standing problem, and a problem that is going to impact us for decades to come.
Mona.
I think if you don't invest in infrastructure, the hardware of a society, and you don't invest in people, you're going to end up where we've ended up. Now, of course, there are lots of external issues as well. But I think governments have choices, and they don't have to make the most popular choices. They have to do what's right. And sometimes doing right, investing in things that may seem invisible, but form the backbone of a society. The fact that, maybe only just over 100 schools, the fact it's not about schools now, it's about children's learning, parents who may have to work around their children's learning now or not be able to go to work. It's about young children who are already deprived of certain levels of education because of COVID, etc., now going to go through actually more tension, more stress. And these things have long-lasting impacts on society. They're not just temporary. And so I think, we don't talk about infrastructure because we think our infrastructure is almost intact. But what we're seeing in the last 2 or 3 years is that it's the very backbone of society, infrastructure and people, that infrastructure is falling apart and it's causing people to fall apart.
Danny?
Well, this dodgy concrete was poured years before the austerity programme began 10 years ago, and it's a legacy of shoddy building going back decades. Of course, it needs to be fixed, and it's a great shame that it's only just come to light. And I think we need to understand why that is. I think there is a challenge to my party about the austerity years. I regret the way that, although we had to cut public spending because the fiscal situation that we inherited was so dire, and Mona's right, of course, that there are choices, but the choice that was made, I think, was the right one, which was that it was simply impossible to carry on borrowing at such an enormous rate, and that some spending cuts had to be made. I do regret the way a lot of those spending cuts fell on local government. I think there was a hollowing out of some communities. I don't think that we needed to necessarily do that building programme for schools. I regret the loss of many services in local communities, I think matter more personally. My great challenge to us all is to think, how do we nurture a healthy society? And actually a lot of that is about having strong local government. And I'm afraid in this case, local government is responsible for the upkeep of these
But if you
schools.
cut local government budgets by 40%, isn't this the inevitable result of that?
Well, actually this is about capital spending, and I don't think the budget was cut to that degree there. But actually there is always a challenge for local government about how to spend. But my answer to the genuine difficulty that local councils have, and we have it in Wiltshire, is we need to reduce the demand on local government, and the great demand is social care. 60% of local government spending goes on care for the elderly. And that is because we spend way too much on late intervention, supporting very expensive residential care homes, rather than helping people to grow old in their own homes and to prevent them requiring so much expensive support. So I think we should be fixing the social conditions that lead to this high spending, and then we'll have the cash that we need to do this very important work about propping up our buildings. But the main thing we need is a healthier society that doesn't impose such enormous costs on the state.
Jeremy.
Well, I think the Birmingham situation is almost predictable. A lot of people have seen this coming for a while, but all local authorities have had huge cuts, as you've said, in central government spending. And remember, roughly 80% of all local authority expenditure comes directly from central government. In some cases, it's more than that. The local rate doesn't raise that much. And in the case of Birmingham, I really don't like the way the whole thing is being framed around it's the issue of equal pay. Equal pay is a given. It should be there. They shouldn't be even debating it. They're say that is the rate that has to be paid. So I support what the GMB union has said on this, where they feel they're being sort of pushed into being almost blamed for the situation in Birmingham. Now, the point you make about buildings and infrastructure is an important one. The use of PFI contracts in the health service has cost the health service a great deal of money. Building schools for the future, whilst it did build a lot of new schools, also involved with it some degree of PFI. And I talk to head teachers of my local schools who are alarmed at the amount of money they have to spend on just paying the people that did the work to build the building. That shouldn't be coming out of the school budget. That should be a clear responsibility. So where do we go from here? Are we to say that Birmingham doesn't deserve an elected local authority that can make decisions for the future? I think you have to look very seriously at the level of underfunding of inner city areas with very high needs. And Danny's point about social care is a fair one, because social care is a huge demand, more so in some areas than others, and I suspect in his constituency probably higher than other places. I don't know, but I would imagine it probably is. But I think that means as a country we should be saying we want a national care service, possibly administered via local government, but something that is set apart from day-to-day local government services. So we say you get your health service free at the point of need, you get your care free at the point of need, assessed as you need it, and supporting people to do that. Maybe local authorities are the best to deliver it, but I just think we've got to accept as a society that there are a large number of people that need social care. It is terrifying for families in middle age that are funding their kids through university and their parents through social care and remortgaging their properties just to keep the family head above water. As a country, we cannot go on ignoring it.
I don't think we need a national care service. I think that's a really dangerous idea. I think it would replicate...
Dangerous? How's it dangerous?
Well, let me try and answer. I think it would replicate all the worst features of the NHS without any of the good ones. We'd have the centralisation, the bureaucracy, the standardisation, rather than what we need. And actually what is good about the care sector as it is that it's very local. It's got a whole diversity of providers. It involves the families themselves in the care of their loved ones. And it has a mixed economy. Those are the good aspects of the care system. But you're right that we need more money into it. But fundamentally, I think we need to be supporting families themselves to look after their elderly parents as much as they can, rather than waiting until they get so unwell that they can then receive more money, which is what you get if you put your elderly parent into residential care. So we need to be helping families to look after, and it's not just elderly, of course, it's disabled adults as well. It's very, very expensive for families at the moment. We do need to relieve that cost, but I don't think we do that by nationalising the care system. We need to support local communities and families more.
But Jeremy, aren't you giving local politicians in Birmingham a free pass here? Because they're the ones that have been overseeing what's gone on in Birmingham. They're the ones that oversaw the pay policy where women weren't paid as much as men. And I'm not blaming... I mean, there'll be blame on both parties here, because Birmingham is a city that's sort of swung one way or the other. But you can't just sort of say, well, it's entirely down to austerity and the amount of money, because other cities in this country, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, they're not in this situation.
They could be in the future.
They could be.
I mean, it's. I think the point that Sarah was making and you were making earlier, Birmingham is the first very big one to get into this situation. But I talk to local councils in my area, and they've managed to maintain services. My council Islington has done extremely well. But nevertheless, they are grappling all the time with this massive loss of central government income, which they cannot make up with local taxation income. It simply isn't there. They're not allowed to do it. They're limited in what they can do. And so are we just to preside over the diminution of local government? Now, yes, of course, inquire into what happened in Birmingham. Of course, where those that have made bad decisions are responsible, obviously hold them to account. But remember, the people of Birmingham deserve decent housing and decent services, just like everybody else does.
Right, we'll move on to other subjects in just a moment with Jeremy Corbyn, Danny Kruger, Professor Mona Siddiqui and Sarah Southern. It's 8:31 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines with Tim Daly.
The chair of the Local Government Association says more councils in England and Wales are on the brink of bankruptcy. It's after Birmingham City Council announced a limit on all but essential spending, blaming financial problems on equal pay claims and also funding cuts. Police in Pembrokeshire say one person has now died after a crash involving a bus and a car. Several others were taken to hospital after the collision this afternoon. And a former Metropolitan Police officer is being given a 4-month suspended sentence for attacking a member of the public while on duty. PC Thomas Carlson punched and kicked a man in New Malden last November. LBC weather, largely dry and clear tonight and feeling warm and humid as well. Lows of 7 in Scotland, but in London, a low of 18 degrees.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
If it was the blokes, you would have everybody there.
Uncompromising.
You're the Deputy Mayor of London for Transport on the day ULEZ extended and you don't know the cost.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
I don't think with Jesus at Dover, he'd have turned the boats back.
Listen on your radio and on Global Player.
Running.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
We have with us Sarah Southern, former advisor to David Cameron, political commentator and comedian, but you were missed at the Fringe this year,
No
Sarah.
Fringe for me this year.
No, hopefully see you there next year. And Mona Siddiqui is a professor of Islamic and Interreligious Studies at the University of Edinburgh, but disgracefully told me earlier that she doesn't come to the Fringe. Oh, you don't know
well-kept
You
secret.
don't. Well, it isn't anymore. You don't know what you're missing out on.
No, that's true.
You could have
I'm
come and
missing
seen
out on
Jeremy and I
hordes of
performing on
people.
stage.
That's exactly why I don't go to the Fringe.
You mean, just that alone put you off, did it? Work?
And Jeremy Corbyn is here. He's got a book of poetry coming out. Is it in November?
It's being printed at the moment, so it'll be fully
so
published in November.
a joint book with Len McCluskey, which we talked about at the Edinburgh Fringe, and we'll have you back to talk about your
Poetry for the Many.
Poetry for the Many. Danny Kruger has written a book not about poetry. It's called Covenant. It's out. I think it's out now, isn't it?
It's out on Thursday this week. Yeah.
What's it about?
Well, it's quite a philosophical book, but it has some policy suggestions in it as well. I'm trying to reach back into what I think of as the eternal truths of conservatism, which is where I think we need to look for the future. But it's also recognising, as I was saying earlier in the programme, Ian, that there's so much change has happened just in this century that we really need to rethink, I think, recent conservative doctrine and move beyond what I think of as a very tired idea that all conservatism stands for is individual personal freedom, liberation from constraint of others. And of course that's essential. We do need to be free. But more profoundly than that, or in addition to that, we need to belong. And what are the conditions of belonging? Well, they're strong families, they're strong neighbourhoods, and they're strong nations. And I think these sort of associations that give us identity and meaning also make us safer and happier and actually freer. And I think that conservatism is at its strongest when it recognises the importance of these associations. So I talk about the need to strengthen family life, strengthen the home, strengthen community life, and strengthen the nation. And for me, Brexit represented a great demand from the people for a stronger nation. But I also think underneath it, what we all really want, Brexiteers or otherwise, are stronger communities and stronger families. And I've got a set of suggestions for that.
Right, well, we've got a question on conservatism here from Frederick in Hastings, who says, Kemi Badenoch is now the most popular cabinet minister among Tory supporters, and even Suella Braverman is the 9th most popular from the list of 31. I'll just let that sink in for a moment. Does this show the Tories are inevitably going back to true conservatism once Sunak is shown the door by the public? Now, that's a Conservative Home poll of Conservative Party members. Rishi Sunak has a negative rating, which is quite something for a leader to be in the negative territory, while Penny Mordaunt and James Cleverly are the 2nd and 3rd most popular. Danny?
Well, I think we do need an authentic conservatism. I think the challenge is a legitimate one. I want to have it before the election, not after. And I think that a lot of what Rishi stands for is right. He's actually socially conservative, more than we've had in recent years from our leaders. I think he believes he was a Brexiteer and he wants to restore the sort of the culture of our country. And I think he's fighting well on a whole bunch of fronts. I think we do, though, need to recognise that the country hasn't yet had what it voted for in 2019, which was a fundamental reset of the power relations in our country. They voted to take back control, not just from Brussels, but from London and from the political establishment. And I don't think we've yet delivered that. They voted for a reset in our economy to level up the country, to get all parts of the country to generate opportunity for young people. And there's good reasons why we haven't been able to do that in the last few years. Other things have happened. It's also quite a short period to do it in, but I think we need to demonstrate change in those directions. And fundamentally, in order to win the election, we need to repeat the trick that Boris pulled off, which was to connect traditional places like mine in Wiltshire, traditional Tory base, with those voters in the North and the Midlands and elsewhere who have small c conservative instincts, patriotic people, family-minded, community-minded people, and who recognised in Boris somebody who was going to deliver change. Unfortunately, he didn't. And I think as a party we've let the country down, and we need to restore their trust in us by delivering and setting a really strong course of change of direction over the next year.
And if you were voting in that poll, which cabinet minister would you vote as your
Well, I
performer?
voted. You mentioned Kemi and Suella. I voted for both of them in the last leadership election.
Did you?
So, but listen, we're not. And
You quite surprised me by that, actually.
do I, Ian?
Yeah.
Who would you put me down?
I would have thought you would have voted for somebody, how can I put this charitably, more thoughtful.
I think they're both very thoughtful, and Ian, more profoundly, listen, all of the candidates, all good in their different ways. I think what we saw from both of those was candidates who would speak for the values and the interests of the British people, and particularly those people who put us into power in 2019. Something profound happened in 2016 and then again in 2019. Politics changed absolutely in this country. It's a recognition of long-term changes, but that was the political moment. And we need to deliver on that change.
Can I just challenge Danny on something? You talk about take back control, and these are the values of the British people. I want to know how, years after the Brexit vote, what we mean by take back control, and why has it been so difficult to take back control?
Well, it's been difficult because I think we went about it in the wrong way in 2016.
But what does it actually mean? I never knew what it meant.
I'm sorry that you struggled to understand what it meant.
Well, I think most people do.
Well, I'm not sure they did, actually. I think people instinctively knew what they were talking about. It was about restoring sovereignty over our borders, our laws, our money.
Which we had.
From Brussels. Well, we can refight that battle, if you like. I think we'll always win it, frankly, because if you ask people, do you want to be controlled by a government based in another country which you do not elect and which takes decisions behind closed doors that you have no power over?
We have in this country as well.
Yes, but we have something of a democracy.
We have the House of Lords as well.
Okay, so
we're not the government.
We could obviously
but
do
I
more.
suppose it's a wider question, because you talked very passionately about the book, The Covenant, and I agree with you about community and strengthening communities. I'm just still curious as to, is confidence in the Tory party going down because people have not been able to deliver on Brexit? Or is it simply because actually people want a different kind of vision for what community looks like, what a nation looks like, and all the kind of sound bites of take back control, etc., really couldn't be delivered because it is very difficult to deliver on those.
It is, and I think, the conversation earlier about, it sounds technical and secondary, but this business about the local government finance and concrete, fundamentally who's making decisions in our country? The Grenfell disaster was because the power that community had, well, they didn't have the power, did they? Decisions were being made remotely behind closed doors in ways that disenfranchised the community. That's the outrage of so many things that go wrong in our country, large and small. And what people really want is agency. They want a sense that they can control the circumstances of their lives, locally and nationally. So Brexit was a great cry genuinely for control, but I think it was about community, and it was about having a sense of our nation as not just being some part of some sort of amorphous global, partnership, but being something distinct and something real that people can have attachment to. And that's what our voters stand for and our voters want. That's what they voted for in 2019. Starmer's offering just a reheat of Blairism, of kind of vague internationalisms and progressive values and, some sort of sound bites about fairness. Actually, what people want, I think, is meaning and the opportunity to contribute and to be part of a proper community.
Jeremy.
Well, we have a country with 500,000 children living in desperate poverty in primary schools. We have housing waiting lists like you've never seen before.
You're being Mr. Misery Guts again.
Yeah, I'm being Mr. Misery Guts because that is the reality of many people's lives. And young people who go to university left with massive debts which hang around their necks for decades and decades to come. And so what hope are we actually offering to the young generation? And that's the whole point.
Can I steer you back to the question, though?
Yeah, you can. What was the question?
Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman, they're very popular among Conservative Party members. Does that mean the Tories are inevitably going back to true conservatism once Sunak has shown the door?
Well, I'm not rightly sure what true conservatism is, unless it's sharp elbows, Margaret Thatcher style, which led to huge differences of living standards and income in our society and a fundamental philosophical change. I mean, Thatcher was very clever, for sure. I think her legacy is terrible. But, there has to be political alternatives. And if the Conservative Party is to go in that direction of individualism rather than community, which I'm not quite sure Danny would actually go along with that, then surely it is up to the Labour Party to move much more in the humanitarian direction of saying, well, the buy-in here is we will have a National Health Service free at the point of need. We will have social care available for all, again, free at the point of need, and we'll have an education service where we don't penalise young people for wanting to study. I mean, it's ludicrous, the debts we're imposing on those people.
Introduced and a housing by system, the Labour Party, which you supported at the time. I must say, I'm sure you've checked this out, I have never voted for student fees at any time. I voted against... No, I mean, you supported the Labour Party, not that particular policy. Of course,
but I did. I said at the time, when the whips came to me at that time and said, it's only £1,000 a year, nobody's going to notice it. I said, you're crossing a Rubicon here. You're crossing a Rubicon, don't do it. Because once you've taken away the principle of free education, from which we all benefit, if a young person becomes a doctor, we all benefit because of that. If they can't afford to become a doctor, we don't have a doctor.
Is there any of the 31 Tory cabinet ministers that you look at and you think, actually, I think you've got the right intentions, you're doing a good job?
That's a hard one. I mean, not really, but I have quite interesting conversations with quite a lot of them at various times, sometimes about individual issues. I'm going to talk to Michael Gove about the endless problems of cladding, and he gives me wonderful, very warm words answers. They're brilliant, and he's great at the warm words answers. The problem is, it don't deliver a policy.
Well, maybe Angela Rayner can bring that about for you now that she's shadowing him.
Well, I will talk to Angela about the whole issue of... this issue of cladding on private sector developments...
Let's not get started on that, because we're running out of time. We haven't heard from Sarah yet.
I'm not surprised that that's the outcome of the Conservative home poll at all. But, it is a broad church in the Conservative Party. And certainly, what Danny's doing with the New Conservatives and putting forward what he thinks, I respect hugely. But I kind of would rather that you wait until after the election before we start fracturing the Conservative Party more. Because I think there will be, if the general election goes as we expect, there will be a time of renewal within the party, because there will be a huge loss of talent from the benches. There will be new ideas coming in. There will be new leaders. And I think, it will be a little bit like it was kind of post-97, where...
They need a new generation, Sarah. Yeah. You should be part of it.
You're all right. No, thank you.
So, of the 31 Conservative cabinet ministers, which do you look at? You think, you are performing well?
Alex Chalk. He would be my number one.
Well, he was the one that went out to defend Lee Anderson's F-off back to France comments, of course.
I think Alex Chalk is a really, really impressive person and impressive politician. And then I would also put Penny Mordaunt and James Cleverly. They would be on my list.
Okay. Right, more questions to come, including a very to-the-point final text question, our fun text question. It's 8:47.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Stuart, now Lord Rose, the last man to run Marks and Spencer's when it made profit in the air of £1 billion. He now chairs Asda. We're probably looking to Labour victory. Is that good for business?
I'm a Conservative. We've had a disastrous time with one pretty lacklustre Prime Minister, two disastrous Prime Ministers, and we've now got a very capable Prime Minister in place who has been dealt a worst hand of cards you could possibly imagine. When people come to the ballot box, think carefully about, what's on offer.
It's a year today since Liz Truss took over as leader of the Conservative Party. How much damage did Liz Truss do to the country?
Immeasurable.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. We have Jeremy Corbyn with us, Danny Kruger, Professor Mona Siddiqui and Sarah Southern. Let's go to our next question. It's from Ben in Clacton. Hello, Ben.
Hello,
Ben, are you
Iain,
there?
and
Hi.
good evening, panel. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
My question is, does the panel agree with Jamie Oliver, as I do, that we should have universal school meals for every child in the country that goes to school?
So I always have a problem with a question that starts with, does the panel agree with Jamie Oliver? Because my natural reaction is no. Sarah Southern.
Last time Jamie Oliver tried tinkering with school meals, I don't think it went down particularly well, did it? You know, when you had a picture of Charles Clarke eating one of those turkey Twizzlers when he was trying to say to him, look how disgusting the food is. I completely agree that kids who need support should get free school meals. I don't necessarily think all kids should get school meals. If your family can pay for them, I think you should be. I don't think we should be funding kids in private schools to have free school meals, or kids in well-off areas to have free school meals, but those who need it absolutely should. And of course, the food that's provided in schools should be more nutritional.
I mean, I don't know, Danny, if you have any insight into this, but I don't detect any great groundswell of people saying the system doesn't work at the moment, that too few kids are getting free school meals.
No, but I do get a lot locally of complaints about the quality of school food and, frankly, the tiny budget that's available per child. So I do think we need to do something about it. But we should be sourcing food locally. We should be improving nutrition. We should be improving education around cooking. This is crucial to the challenge that we have from obesity in this country, as well as poverty. So I think it's a legitimate argument. But I agree with Sarah that I don't think, nationalising everything, getting the taxpayer to pay for everything, standardising and centralising is not the answer. And we need to empower schools to source their food locally and teach kids and families, of course, as well as schools staff themselves, how to cook well.
Jeremy?
We've had free school meals in all our primary schools in my borough since 2010, and we do it because we believe that it ensures all children get a decent meal, ensures they all eat it together, and that's an important part of growing up. And if you restrict it to those on universal credit or any other form of benefit, then you cross a line where low-income working parents have to pay for the lunch. Their income as a level might be almost exactly the same as somebody on benefits who gets a free school meal. It becomes very divisive. I think it should be universal. Across London, it is now universal primary schools. I think the whole thing of children actually having their lunch together is an important one. And in one of our schools, they've done a really good thing. They cook the food on site, obviously, and they employ the staff directly to provide the food. And the chef is also a teacher, so teaches the children about cooking and nutrition at the same time. So the kids then become part of the whole process, that the school meal function is part of
Get the kids
life.
to cook the meals.
Well, you're into child labour now. But children being involved in it is great. And also, whilst the space is quite limited, in other of our schools, they've got, fortunately, quite a nice school garden. They produce some food, which ends up being the kids eat for their lunches. Now, you're never going to produce enough for all food, but I do think it's important. Now, come on, your constituency, Danny, there's loads of space there. You could have enough vegetables to feed the whole school.
Yeah, we should have more local. We should
Absolutely, local production, and also children understanding how vegetables are produced, how food is produced. That's an important part of it.
Agree.
Mona?
I think as a point of principle, I would agree. I think you can't expect children to study or learn anything if they're hungry. And I'm slightly reticent about how you divide children who can afford and who can't afford, because I think we're going into very murky territory there. When we've been hearing that teachers are having to bring in food as well as other things to feed children, or children are coming in with dirty clothes or they're unwashed and teachers are having to help out, often from their own pockets, I think we are in a bit of a crisis. And irrespective of how we teach them how to grow food or think of food, I think that if we can't even give them a square meal so that they can learn and they can study and they can have a vision for their future, it says something about the kind of society we've become.
Now, Steve in Upper Holloway has a question. It's only directed at you, Jeremy, I'm afraid. You can probably guess what it is, can't you? Would Jeremy like to announce tonight on this programme that he'll be standing at the next election?
I'd love to announce I'm happy to be the MP for Islington North, and Steve, I'm still around.
Because you did more than hint in Edinburgh at the show that you did with me that you might be considering standing for Mayor of London. Would you like to expand on that?
I'm considering many things, but I'm very proud and very happy to continue being the MP for Islington North, and I look forward to continuing to represent Steve.
Such a politician's answer.
Absolutely.
But when
I'm sure you're pleased with the answer.
When do you? No, I'd quite like you to make an actual announcement. When will you make a decision, though, on your future?
I'll let you know.
Exclusively on this programme?
I'll let you know.
You just want the glory, don't you, Ian?
Always, Mona.
You want to be the one.
You've caught on very well. This is your first appearance, but you've caught on very well, if I may say so.
Steve, thanks for his question. I love representing that community. I have done for 40 years, and I think particularly the Labour Party members in Islington North ought to have a democratic right to choose who their candidate should be, and we shouldn't have people imposed.
That's very clear. Right, final main question. This is from Liam in Cockfosters, who says, is a wealth tax the right way to tackle inequality in this country? Now, Rachel Reeves, who's going to be on the programme tomorrow for an hour taking calls at 7, she's Labour Shadow Chancellor, she's ruled it out. Michael Gove hinted the other day in a podcast that he might support the idea. Sarah Southern, and if you can all be quite brief with your answers on this.
No, I don't support a wealth tax. I do agree that everybody should be taxed a fair amount, but I don't believe that we should have a wealth tax. I don't think that's the answer to our problems.
Mona?
I agree with Sarah. I think that the way to make democracy work is not to say that there has to be equality. We can't have equality in any society, but you have to give people enough sense of having a stake in society, that what they say matters, that they're valued. And that's not just about funding and money.
Jeremy?
I support a wealth tax, and if we increase tax to the top 1% of earners to the 50% rate, that would bring in £5 billion alone, which is rather more than it would cost to restore the two-child policy.
In terms of a wealth tax, though, I mean, that phrase means different things to different people. Yes. At what level would you introduce it?
Well, I think you go for, if you do it on wealth, you do it on wealth over £10 million, for example. So you're not hitting somebody who happens to live in a house that's worth around £1 million, which in London and the South East is not that unusual. I think if you go for people with a substantial amount of wealth and tax them on it, what is wrong with that? And I remember talking to the CBI about this. I was trying to persuade them what a good idea it would be to increase taxation. And they were all staring at me, lots of them. And then the point I just made was that, OK, I get you don't want to increase tax. I get you don't want to pay any more tax. But are you happy walking past rough sleepers when you go to your office on a Monday morning? Just ask yourself that question. What kind of society do you want to live in?
Danny?
So I would like to see taxes come down overall, taxes on income, taxes on VAT, taxes on businesses. That said, I do see the argument for a wealth tax. All of the money that was printed by the Bank of England over the last 15 years, a lot of that has flowed into assets, into wealth, including into property, and created a great property bubble. I think there is an argument, as Jeremy says, for putting some sort of wealth tax on the very rich, but it's not sufficient, and it's not the answer on its own. Fundamentally, we need growth, and the danger of driving entrepreneurs and the wealthy out of this country or disincentivising them from growing their businesses is a big one. But I do think there is an argument for saying that some of the unearned windfall that property owners and asset owners have earned over the last 15 years because of Bank of England money printing should possibly be taken back by the taxpayer.
Somebody says here, can Jeremy Corbyn be on the cross-question panel every night? He is brilliant. The answer is no. I think I can answer for you, Jeremy, on that.
I'll be silent on this one.
Right, final fun question from Matt in Brighton. Following Gillian Keegan's hot mic moment this week, if the panel could each add an F-bomb, we all know what we're talking about here, to one famous political speech, what would it be? Mona?
When Tony Blair said education, 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 add an F to that, because I think that's the state of our education today.
Wouldn't it? Yeah. Jeremy?
Yeah. When Margaret Thatcher put together her highly contrived ladies not for turning speech, I wonder what she really thought at the end of it. because it was all so contrived and so put on.
You can't
great
really
programme by
imagine her
Lucy
saying-
Worsley last night comparing Margaret Thatcher to Elizabeth I. It was brilliant.
Oh, I must watch that.
Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant.
I can't imagine her using that word, though, can you?
No, I can't at all, and I can't imagine any circumstances she would use any word like that.
Danny?
If the British Empire and its Commonwealth should last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest effing hour. That's the spirit that won the war.
Sarah?
And he probably did use a lot of bad language.
Bring down this effing wall.
Tear down this
effing wall.
I think, but surely the winner would have to be ask not what your effing country can do for you, ask what you can do for your effing country. On that note, thank you to you all, Jeremy Corbyn, Danny Kruger, Mona Siddiqui and Sarah Southern. Tomorrow on the panel, we have the Conservative Party Chairman Greg Hands, the Lib Dem Foreign Affairs spokesperson Layla Moran, the economist Grace Blakely and the Mail on Sunday columnist Dan Hodges. That should prove to be a fairly sparky one. Now, in the next hour, we're going to turn our attention to the 4-day week because Humza Yousaf, the Scottish First Minister, he's introduced a trial which will enable Scottish civil servants to work a 4-day